can you take roll?
Joel's not here yet.
Okay, well, we'll wait then a minute.
You know, Joel is taking the bar today.
Oh, that's
Oh,
right.
where are his priorities?
He did say he may join, but he would for sure be late if he did join.
Oh, I wanted to hear about it, so we'll just have to wait until next time. So go ahead with that excused absence. Do you want to take roll?
Okay. Andrea Bolton,
Present.
Graham Gillette,
Here.
Sue Hubbard,
Present.
Diane Munns.
Here.
I don't know,
So,
Graham, if he
what?
passes that bar, and I'm sure he will, we are going to, there's going to be 3 attorneys on the board.
Too much. Too much. Okay. The first item is the consent agenda, consisting of the minutes from June 22nd, June 23rd, Waterworks Trustees meetings, the July 7th Planning Committee meeting, the minutes from the July 7th Customer Relation Committee meeting, the July 14th Finance and Audit Committee meeting, financial statements, list of payments, summary of CEO approved expenditures in excess of $20,000, and the next meeting date. Can I have a motion and a second, and then we'll see whether or not we need to pull anything out? Or why don't we start with, does anybody want anything pulled out? Okay.
Nothing from me.
Can I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Michelle, you want to take the roll call vote?
Bolton,
Yes.
Gillette,
Yes.
Hubbard,
Yes.
Munns.
Yes.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda is the public comment period. Is there anyone on the call who would like to speak at this time?
I do think Bill Blue Bar, Union President, would like to make some comment today. Bill, are you there?
You make sure he's not muted.
Hello, board. Can you hear me?
Yes.
you can.
This is Bill Blubaugh, and I had a question for the board. If or when we go to the regionalization, what is the impact going to be on our employees? I know myself and Jeannie Middleton have been contacted by outside people and about 5 other employees that have concerns about our jobs. And I just wanted to get your thoughts on it.
I'd be happy to take a first crack at that. You know that under the regionalization proposal, nothing changes on the distribution side. So that will continue to be run by the Des Moines Waterworks and overseen by the Board of Trustees. So what we're talking about is the water production side. I know that as we put together the draft of a proposal for discussions, that the continuing interest and welfare of employees was top of mind, and that we put a provision in there for fairly long-term contract to continue the employment of our employees. That being said, you know, this is a draft, and it will be a point of discussion, but I can tell you that that's something that we were concerned about and made sure that we covered in the draft agreement that we put together. Who else wants to? Ted or any of the other board members? Sue, you probably have a lot of most familiarity with all of this.
Sure. I mean, our interest has been to protect our employees. I guess because the regional portion would not change at all for the production of our citizens of Des Moines, I think we would have greater protection for our employees if we were the regional producer and viewed as the regional producer, even though we are today, and didn't lose some portion of our water to another organization that may build their own plants. So to me, the security for our employees would be even stronger if regionalization does take place, because all of the models that we've been looking at is being able to produce more water out of our plants.
Bill, are you permanently in the lead position there? Did we lose him?
Great. I don't know if he's still there, Graham, but the answer to your question is yes. They did have their nomination process, and Bill was unopposed in the process. So he is our union president going forward.
Well, if he's still there, I wanted to propose something to him, but
He appears to be. Bill, are you hearing us?
Maybe for the sake of the record, then I'm be interested to hear your proposal. Maybe we can follow up with him afterwards offline.
yeah, I see that he just disappeared from the screen. Maybe he's going to call back here.
Well, I do show another iPhone user with their hand raised. Do you want to answer that question, or should I go ahead?
Sure. Let's see. That may be him.
Hello.
Is that you,
Hello.
Jeannie?
Yeah, this is Jeannie. I
Hey,
don't know where Bill is, but I'm sure he'll come back.
He disappeared. Well, I'm glad you're there. All I was going to say was, first of all, congratulations to Bill for taking the job. I'm glad that he did it, and that's going to be helpful. But you know, and I'm just speaking for one board member, and I think the most important thing to me when it comes to regionalization is that we protect those people that we represent, I represent as a board member, and that's the people of Des Moines. And in fact, the best way to do that is to ensure that not only is their investment guarded, but also everything we do, our ability to produce safe, affordable, abundant drinking water is preserved. And in order to do that, we need to make sure that our employees operate in the safe manner and the productive manner that they do today. And we can only do that with cooperation of the union. So what I would suggest, Jeannie, to you and Bill and everybody else that's involved from the union is that you continue to be involved, and maybe even more involved as these regional discussions move forward, so that I can honor my commitment as a board member, and that is to protect the people of Des Moines with your help.
And we appreciate that, Graham. The other thing that I did want to say is I know we hear a lot about water production, of course, is going to be a key if this change takes place. We're also concerned about the other jobs. And I just want to put that out there, that is a big concern.
And I think rightfully so, Jeannie. I mean, I think we need to, obviously our job is to operate from beginning to end, production and delivery to the customer. Again, we can't do that without cooperation of the union. And so I agree with you. We need to work together on this.
I need to clarify something that, Jeannie, that you just said. You said we talked about water production, but you're also concerned about the other jobs. What other jobs?
I think she's talking about distribution.
Well, we will continue to.
I'm talking about distribution and grounds and the office.
Right.
Everybody.
Those are not included in the regionalization discussions.
So where does that leave those?
Under the Des Moines, under the Board of Trustees, just as it has been.
Well,
Not under a regional entity.
they'll continue as is the understanding, that without being impacted. And I shouldn't use the word impact. But I want to second Graham's proposal of continuing to stay involved. I think throughout all of our regionalization discussions, protecting our employees has continued to be brought up as a major piece in this and putting together a proposal. So I appreciate you both coming to this meeting and raising these concerns and ensuring that we're having this discussion in a public setting and with you all, so that we can continue to advocate for our employees and our Des Moines customers.
I would say, Ted, you mentioned to me that you're having a weekly meeting with the union right now, and I imagine regionalization comes up in that discussion.
It does.
By all means, keep us informed, and if we need to do something else, is there's a better way for us to include our employees, union, and others in this discussion. I think all of us are open to figure out how to do that.
Absolutely. We actually had our weekly meeting today, and those have been great discussions, I'll have to say. And I just want to add here that while we have talked about regionalization a number of times, and I've shared, the proposals and what they look like, and, the 20-year operating agreement is in the initial proposal, and distribution and customer service and other functions are going to stay local. I think that the union understands that, but it's change, and change always creates a little bit of uncertainty in people's minds. And so the union, I think, is doing a great job, the leadership especially, coming forward and just sharing with the board that there is some sense of uncertainty surrounding this regionalization concept for our folks. And they, I think, are just looking for some reassurance that the board realizes they're still out there and they're still a critical part of what we do. And I commend them for bringing that concern, if you will, or that sense of uncertainty forward, because it is out there and it does exist. And I think it's good to talk about it. So, Jeannie, thanks. Bill apparently didn't come back. He left it to you to carry the message, which thank you for doing that.
Yeah, he's listening. He couldn't get back in, so he's on my speakerphone. So.
Okay, good.
So he's listening.
The other thing I want to say is that no decisions have been made yet. We have not done anything, and that there will be an education piece if we can come to some kind of tentative agreement, and it'll have to be good for everybody. I think that's one thing that we've realized, that if everybody can't look at it and say it's fair, we're going to have issues with getting it approved, both through our city and with our customers and our labor force and all of the other ones. So we want to be open and communicate. And if there are specific questions or specific concerns, be sure and get those to us so we can answer them.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Jeannie and Bill.
Anything else? We're in the public comment period before we close the public comment period. Michelle, do you have anything else in the chat?
I do not see any other hands raised.
Okay, so we will close the public comment hearing. We have a number of action items. 3A on the agenda, if you're following. The first one is acceptance of the 2020 pre-sedimentation basin number 2 rechaining.
Yeah, a little background on this, if I might, Diane. Sure. This is a project that we do on a regular basis. We have 6 treatment basins, and we rechain them each every 7 or 8 years. So that means we're doing one almost every year. And this one is no different, except that there were a couple of challenges with this particular project. Challenges that resulted in some change orders that I want to make you aware of. The first challenge was that we were scheduled to rechain this treatment basin in the middle of a pandemic, which, as you know, We sequestered the plant. We even moved our employees out. We had people living in campers. We just were not prepared to allow a contractor to come in and be a part of that sequestration initially. And so we had to delay implementation of this project. We had to delay, and then once we became comfortable with allowing them back in, we restricted their movements, and we also asked them to do some work that we would normally do, specifically ensuring that the basin remained dewatered. These are basins that are below ground. They typically have water flowing through them, and when you try to empty them, they leak a lot, frankly. And so we usually take on the task of ensuring that the water stays out so the contractors can do their work. We didn't want to intermingle our employees with the contractors' employees, and so we asked them to do that. And so there are a couple of items on here, a couple of change orders, number 1 and number 5, that are specifically related to the pandemic and our response and our decisions related to protecting our employees and the contractor. About over $28,000 worth of costs associated with the delay in start date, and then the additional effort that we asked them to put forth to do the work. The other significant item here, which resulted in change orders 4 and 6, related specifically to welding rod that our staff has a lot of experience with, and they have specific knowledge of working in these basins. And there's a certain facet of this project that we don't do on a regular basis. In fact, we haven't done it for more than a decade. There are literally small rails cast into the floor of these basins, and think of narrow gauge railroad rails. And over the decades, those wear down and we have to weld a cap onto those. And our experience is that there's a fairly specific type of electrode, a welding electrode, that is best suited for that task. Well, unfortunately, the contractor proposed using a different electrode. We did not accept that electrode. Our specification wasn't clear enough to them to help them understand that that's what we wanted. And so we worked with them, and we actually ended up paying them additional money to provide the electrode that we wanted to weld that 6,000 feet or whatever it was. It's not that much, hundreds of feet of cap on that electrode. That was a total of, with the additional prep and the different electrodes, about $25,000. Waldinger was the only bidder on the contract, so it really didn't make a difference in terms of would someone else have been low. If they'd have known this, that wasn't an issue, but it's something that frankly we should have caught before it got to this point. The spec should have been a little tighter, but our field staff who deal with this every day were very comfortable and confident that that's what we needed to do. And so we did ask the contractor to make that change. But we did have a fairly significant number of change orders on this job, more than we like to see, but they were in the end appropriate and things we needed to do to get the best project. So the work is complete. Waldinger did a great job. I will say that they worked incredibly well with us in terms of our pandemic planning and monitoring their employees' health and fitness for duty, and making sure that they didn't introduce any concerns into our plant, which was still sequestered at the time that we let them in. But it was a little bit of a trial. We did get it done, and the basin is back in service in time for the high demand that we've been experiencing recently. So with that explanation, we would recommend that the board accept the basin rechaining contract that was completed by Waldinger Corporation.
Can I have a motion to accept the 2020 pre-sedimentation basin number 2 rechaining contract completed by the Waldinger Corporation in the amount of $298,728.37?
So moved.
Seconded.
Any more questions for Ted? Hearing none, Michelle, will you take a roll call vote?
Bolton,
Yes.
Gillette,
Yes.
Hubbard,
Yes.
Muns.
Yes.
Thank you.
The next item on the agenda is the bids for Highway G14 feeder main and establishment of the date of the public hearing as of August 2020 board meeting. Ted, you want to explain this?
Yes, the board will recall a recent project where we extended transmission from near the McMullen treatment plant through the park and across the interstate to the city of Cumming, including a booster station. That project is complete and in service. And this is basically just an extension of that feeder main on into the city of Norwalk to allow them to take advantage of the capacity that was developed with that first project. Currently, they're connected to the new project with 8-inch pipe. They just can't get the capacity, and that was always known. This is just the next phase of the project, and there will be yet another phase, which is a meter pit to allow this new piping to supply the city of Norwalk. 12,000 feet of 16-inch transmission line, essentially running right straight down the Cumming Highway from the city of Cumming to the east. Norwalk is paying 100% of the cost of this project, both design and construction, so there's no fiscal impact to us. It's just a project that we're helping them administer to get the benefit out of the transmission and pump station project that we did last year. So we would recommend that the board authorize solicitation of bids.
Can I have a motion to authorize staff to solicit bids for Highway G14 feeder main and establish the date of the public hearing as of August 2020 board meeting and direct staff to publish notices provided by law?
So moved.
Second.
Any questions for Ted on this project?
So these,
Hearing none. Oh, I'm sorry.
this is just a quick question. These phases are triggered by population growth, I assume then? Is that correct?
Yes, that's exactly right, Andrea. Population is what's driving their demand. Norwalk, I would have to say, 5 years ago was in a position where they really needed to increase their capacity. They've done a lot in the last couple of years, working on their booster station, their original booster station, putting in standby power there, participating in last year's project and now this. They're really positioning themselves to be ready for additional growth and supply.
Any other questions? Michelle, take the roll call vote.
Bolton,
Yes.
Gillette,
Yes.
Hubbard,
Yes.
Muns.
Yes.
Thank you.
The next item is the First Amendment to ground lease agreement with Tower Co. at Nolan Standpipe site. Ted?
Yeah, the board will recall that we have a number of cellular antennas on top of our towers, and we have an ongoing initiative to remove that equipment from the towers and put it on monopoles on the same site. We've found over the years that having those facilities on our towers is problematic when it's time for us to paint the tower or what have you. And so this is just sort of the next installment of that, moving equipment off of this tower and onto a monopole. We actually signed an agreement with Tower Co. in June of 2019 to install a monopole and move the equipment. But unfortunately, our selected and agreed upon site within the Nolan Standpipe site did not meet the city's zoning requirements. They want the monopole to be farther from the property line than the original site we identified would allow. So we've moved the site. And that's what we're coming to the board with today, is a request to amend that agreement to relocate that monopole site from the northeast corner of the property to more of a central location on the property, as you can see in the drawing that Michelle has up on screen there.
Okay, let's get a motion to approve and authorize the chairperson and CEO and general manager to execute the First Amendment to ground lease agreement and amended memorandum of agreement with Tower Co. 2013 LLC at the Nolan Standpipe site.
So moved.
Seconded.
Questions for Ted on this? Hearing none. Michelle, you want to take the vote?
Bolton,
Yes.
Gillette,
Yes.
Hubbard,
Yes.
Moines.
Yes.
Thank you.
The next item on the agenda is approval of seating concepts within Phase 1 Park Improvements area.
Yes, we saw some of this at the planning committee meeting this month. I think this is a really neat opportunity for the Phase 1 improvements. The facilities have been in place and in use for about a year now, and the foundation has done some evaluation of what kind of seating might be of value to the area and where that might go. As you heard at the planning committee meeting, they're looking at some picnic tables, some what I would call seating benches. There's one waiting bench, and then some outdoor classrooms, which will dovetail nicely with what the plans are for the Bill Stowe Memorial. Today we bring to you this concept, and Michelle is going to show us the kind of the seating plan, the drawing of where they're thinking of putting each of these types of benches around the improved areas. And they've done a very thoughtful job, I believe. You can see the red dots there kind of in the trees to the east of the amphitheater. Those are picnic tables in a nice shaded area. They've got the yellow dots are benches, and they're primarily placed out around the walkway there. So as people are walking, they can sit and rest. And each of those is near a light pole. So even in the evening, they'd be a nice lighted area. The one waiting bench there next to the restroom, and then the 3 outdoor classrooms are tentatively slotted in some clearing areas within the Arboretum, but those exact locations are going to be coordinated with the Memorial Committee so that those could potentially even serve as breakout rooms when there's a class or what have you at the Stowe Memorial Classroom. So I think they've done a very nice job and thought through this fairly carefully. They've given it a year of experience to help them understand where seating might be of value. The plan here is that they will place these benches and picnic tables and whatnot over time. They are opportunities for donation. Folks can donate a bench if they want. They don't intend to go out and just put them all in at once, but I could imagine that there might be some interest in donating a bench or a table. So we come to you today for approval of this recommended plan, and the implementation would then begin after funds become available through the Park Foundation.
Okay, let's get a motion to approve the seating concepts within Phase 1 Park Improvements.
So moved.
So moved. Second.
Okay, questions? Comments?
It's a great presentation at the board meeting. Very well done.
Thank you, Sue. That's typical for Michael, as always.
I'm having a little bit of trouble with the picture. Where is the lighting?
The light poles.
The lighting, what do you even call it?
River Constellation.
The lighting sculpture, that beautiful lighting sculpture.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's Michelle, you see where the right there? No, right there is the sculpture. Where Michelle's cursor is there. You can see the waiting bench is on the north side of the restroom.
Okay.
The lighted sculpture is just to the east of the restroom.
Okay, thanks.
So none of these are really particularly close to the sculpture.
Ted, I think your reference to lighting was there are light poles about the Great Lawn. So that might have got misunderstood, but
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Yeah, there are like street lights along the sidewalk out there
Right.
correct.
where the benches
Right.
are going to go, and each bench is, I believe, Michael, intended to be associated with a given light pole.
Yeah, roughly speaking, it may not be a 1-for-1 match, but it'll be very close to that, and probably go in a way that's kind of balanced and hopefully symmetrical for my liking.
That's the engineer coming out of you there.
Yeah, it just kind of falls out every once in a while.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Michelle, you want to take a vote?
Yep, Bolton,
Yes.
Gillette,
I'm sorry, yes.
Hubbard,
Yes.
Muns.
Yes.
Thank you.
The next item on the agenda is one that we have had recently on all our agendas, the COVID-19 response, that we ratify actions that have been taken by staff to meet the requirements and necessities of COVID, created by COVID. Ted?
Exactly, Diane. And the good news here this month is that the pace of pandemic-driven changes has really slowed. We haven't done a lot different. I think we can go through this fairly quickly. The one big change is that the main office did open to customers in the last month, and so we'll talk a little bit about that. But starting at the top there, the parks remain open. The shelters and restrooms are open now for events. We're not seeing a lot of events, but they are open. Most of our scheduled park events, those being the concerts and larger events, have been canceled all the way through August. The first public event on the calendar is something called the Butter Cow Festival, which is going to be held August 14th and 15th. And this is really an attempt by the foundation to do a very careful job of trying to hold a music event respecting the social distancing needs of this pandemic. And they were out today actually showing the media kind of how they're going to create these 15 by 15 foot squares and allow small groups of people. You buy a square and then you stay in your square. There'll be some music, there'll be some food available, and there'll be social distancing and mask requirements on site. So that's kind of the one thing that's on tap, and that is, as I said, August 14th and 15th. In terms of customer service, the office did reopen on the 29th of June. That first week that we were open, we really didn't do a lot of service terminations. In fact, our normal collection activities didn't begin until the middle of July. And even then, in that first week of July, we had very few service terminations. But we've kind of been back to normal here the last week or so with our folks out on the street and practicing our normal collection practices. And we're getting a lot of folks calling in and making pay arrangements and moving forward and getting back up and on the right side of things there. So that's very possible. Even though we've been out and working in the street and working on collections, traffic in the office is still pretty light. Typically, we would expect to see 120 or more payments made in the office on a daily basis. The average since we've opened has been more like 70. So quite a few lower, but people are calling in and making payments and making pay arrangements, and so things have been pretty effective. We are requiring customers who come in to wear a mask. If they don't have a mask, we provide one. Employees are also wearing masks. We have the plexiglass screens in place. We have hand sanitizer for both the employees and customers at each customer service station, the floor markings and the channelizers, and it's been working very well. As I said, traffic's been somewhat light, but what I hear is that it's going well. We've had no issues with anyone not wanting to wear a mask. We do provide the masks for free, but we're not having to provide very many. We actually had 2 guards stationed here, one to provide crowd control, if you will, and one who sort of serves as our first reception person. And next week, we're only going to have 1 guard. We haven't had issues, and we don't believe that we need that second guard. So that's moving along well. One thing I will mention about customer assistance is that Impact, which is a customer assistance organization, received $80,000 in the Des Moines area to help folks with their utility bills. They have helped 368 families in the metro area. 323 of those were Des Moines Waterworks customers. They have spent their $80,000, and so that particular allotment is gone, but they're hoping to get additional funds and provide additional service going forward. Employee health and safety, really not a lot has changed there. Honestly, we continue to do work from home, report from home. Folks are reporting to the non-traditional rally points that we've talked about before. I won't get into a lot of detail there unless there are questions. Really, the only change that we've made in that regard is that if someone now has contact with someone outside of their home who tests positive and they need to self-isolate or stay home in quarantine because of that direct contact with someone outside their home, we're asking them to use their sick leave to cover that time that they have to spend at home. If it's someone in their home, that qualifies them for the emergency paid sick leave through the CARES Act. If it's someone outside of their home, that does not qualify them for emergency paid sick leave. Initially, we had a very small number of employees who we just paid them to stay home. But at this point, our perspective is that employees know what it takes to avoid being exposed. And if they want to go out and interact in a way that creates that exposure, that's fine. We don't restrict that. Obviously, we can't. But if they end up needing to isolate, we just are now asking them to use their sick leave. So that's one small change. From a cost perspective, our total additional cost stands at about $955,000. That's a little higher than we looked at last month. Though that new total does include, though, $41,000 for establishing our new secondary control center and about $5,000 for the plexiglass and stanchions and floor markings and things that we put up in customer service to facilitate that opening. So that's the update. That's where we are, probably where we will be for a period of time. And we would ask that the board approve those practices.
If I can have a motion to ratify the COVID-19 emergency action plan in a second, and then we can ask Ted any questions we have.
So moved.
Second.
Questions?
Ted, I'm just curious, when you were talking about, it would probably be a guess on your part, but fewer number of people coming in the door, to pay their bill than really what our previous traffic was.
Right.
Are they thinking that we are City of Des Moines and that they're hearing that the City of Des Moines offices aren't open? Are more people just staying home and not being out? Do you have any kind of idea as to why that number? I thought it would go up right away.
Sue, we thought that it might also go up, and a couple of thoughts I have, and then I'm going to ask Amy to be prepared and unmute herself and she can add. But I do think that we had some social payers who just came in to have something to do and to have a conversation with a nice person behind the counter, and you could kind of tell who they were because they came in every month and they were willing to chat. So a lot of those I think are probably staying home. I think the pandemic has helped a lot of people recognize or learn how to do the online payment options and to pay by phone. And it just, they didn't do that before, but now that they're doing it, it's probably easier than coming in. Amy, what would you add to that?
Ted, I would have answered just like that. I think people are still hesitant to go out in public when unnecessary. And so they are doing more phone calling or online payment. So, you know, it is difficult to know if they think we're part of the city. That's certainly not an unusual comment. But we haven't, I haven't heard that anecdotally. Oh, you know, I'm surprised you're open. I thought you were the city. So I think it's, you know, really they just aren't moving out and about yet, unless they have to.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Hey, Ted, what do we know about FEMA and reimbursements, and where's that process? And when
You
does
know,
that?
not as much as we'd like to know, frankly. I did talk to Donna Heckman, who is, you know, handles all of our insurance and is handling the FEMA claim, and gave me the revised numbers. And I asked her that specifically, and she said that they're still working through the worksheets and whatnot, and that the, you know, the time for determination hasn't come yet, and that it's going to be a while before we know if they're inclined to reimburse. So it's, frankly, it's a slow process, and we remain hopeful. AWWA and AMWA and others are really working hard on our behalf. And then, you know, we have some contacts that we may use if it gets to the point where it looks like they're unwilling to reimburse. But right now we're trying to work our way through their process and follow the rules and comply with all the submittal requirements and give them the information that they need.
So we're seeing, you know, it was mentioned the city of Des Moines continuing to close their public offices, and some other communities in the metro doing the same. Do we have a threshold, or I guess threshold is the best word I can think of right now, of what it would take for us to reverse course and shut the offices again, or restrict some movement within the different facilities? Or are we just going to continue to slowly open things back up?
That's a great question, Andrea, and one we talk about on a regular basis. And a couple of different perspectives that I would share. One, when this started, you know, we were very concerned about our operational spaces because so many of our people were gathered into small areas within the plant, and including the control center, including the break rooms and lunch rooms where they did their morning work calls. We now have a second control center, and people are spaced out there. We have created secondary and tertiary lunch rooms where people don't gather all together for lunch anymore. We continue to have folks reporting to parking lots. And so on the operational side, I feel like we learned a lot and we implemented new practices, and those are all still in place. We implemented those practices, frankly, so that we could stop spending money on sequestering and housing people on site. But those practices feel protective to me. You know, we still have large groups of people who are not even reporting to the plant on a daily basis. And so I feel pretty good about that. On the other side of the coin is the main office. You know, we opened in part because we didn't want people to get 6 months behind and just never be able to catch up. We opened because we wanted to help folks reprioritize their payments. We wanted to get back in the game, if you will, and just make sure that you know, paying the water bill didn't kind of fall off the desk completely. I will tell you that we're certainly keeping an eye on the numbers in Polk County, but we have not identified a specific criteria or set of criteria that if we get to this point, we will close the office down again. But that is certainly something that we might have to do. And I was a little surprised when I heard that the city had closed their office buildings until the 1st of October. But when I talked to the city manager, Diane and I talked to the mayor and city manager this week, and when we had that conversation, they did share that they've effectively found a workaround for everything that they need to do in their city buildings, except for a couple of very small things. He didn't share what those were, but he said that you can apply for permits and pay most fees and do what people used to come in to do. Now we have that ability for most things. People can pay online, people can pay over the phone, people can pay at the drop box, but we still just have a certain number of customers who, if they can't get into this building, they can't pay. And so I'm going to ask Amy again if you have anything you'd like to add to that in terms of consideration for reclosing.
Yeah, you know, just we believe, and based on, you know, comments that I'm hearing from our contact center staff, we've created safe spaces for customer service, and I feel like the staff feels safe here at work. We rotate frequently at the front desk, and with all the safeguards that we've placed, it feels very manageable. And it's, of course, no environment is totally risk-free, but I think we've done about as much as we can to make it as safe as possible. The other thing, you know, we are responsible for the collections for the city of Des Moines. And so if we aren't open, and if those cash paying customers can't get to our office, the city money certainly suffers as well. So we are representing both Des Moines Waterworks and really the city of Des Moines when we're open to accept their payments.
Any other questions? If not, it's been moved and seconded to ratify the COVID-19 Emergency Action Plan. Michelle, take the roll call.
Holton,
Yes.
Gillette,
Yes.
Hubbard,
Yes.
Moines.
Yes.
Thank you.
We have our information items, our board committee reports. Andrea, do you have anything additional from planning?
I do. I just wanted to mention the floor medians and talk a little bit about how well those are doing. Hopefully you guys have been out on floor and seen the beautiful plantings. So far it's been reported as a success without any complaints. It's nice that the contractors are able to get out there weekly on the weekends to weed and water, and been able to cut down on lane closures and the amount of time the lanes have to be closed to be able to take care of those medians. Extra bonus that some of the irrigation in those have gone in this year instead of next year as had been planned. It did hurt some plantings, but we were able to recover. So you might see more about this at our August meeting, but I just wanted to commend our contractors and Jess with facilities and all the work that has been done so far this summer to make those look as good as they do.
Thanks. Finance and Audit Committee.
We talked about rate restructuring, and I'll let Ted add what he wants to on that. It was more of a community meeting than a committee meeting in some ways, which is a good thing. I mean, that's our purpose here, is to discuss this with all of our customers. Ted, what do you have to add there?
I think it was a good lead into August's Finance and Audit Committee meeting, where we will be getting some sense from the board on, you know, which steps we want to take. Raftelis outlined about 3 things that we could do to move this process forward, and now the board can talk about which steps we want to take and when. So it was kind of phase 1 of that discussion, and we look forward to phase 2 in 2 weeks.
So Ted, you and I talked a little bit about this and the timing of it and coming up with the firm recommendation out of the committee to the board without knowing what the budget numbers are. And that we'll need to coordinate those things to look at impacts and see what kind of progress we can make in some of our goals that we set for rate design changes.
Exactly. I think that will be the heart of the discussion at August Finance and Audit is, I think we all agree that we want the rate classes to pay their cost of service. And so we need to move things in that direction. Then there's a question of inter-class equity, and do we want to take a step to move things in the right direction there, or do we want to take 2 steps? And we have a couple of opportunities. And then once we decide sort of which of those 3 steps we want to take, we need to talk about timing and phasing. And that's where we get to the point where we can't really tell you in August what the rates are going to look like because we're not through the budget process. Usually we would come to the board in September with a preliminary discussion of rates for the following year. So I think we'll have good opportunity to discuss, which of the steps we like and which ones we want to consider in August. And then in September, we will talk about, what we might want to do with actual rates and have a better opportunity to look at what the impact is and the goals that we have for this restructuring of our rates and what that looks like in terms of actual rate increases and the time over which we will make those increases. So a lot to come in the next couple of months on rates.
Any questions? Okay, Customer Relations Committee. Sue?
Sure. Just kind of as an update, I think we shared with everyone that there has been an interest from some of the water utilities and us getting together with them, and there are some dates on the calendar. The issues are not a surprise. They're the same ones that were shared with us by the West Des Moines Waterworks manager back in September, I believe. So we have those dates on the calendar, and I think we're just trying to continue to move ahead and answer any questions that the groups have. That's all I have. Am I missing anything, Ted?
So I think that's about it. We did talk a little bit about water wheeling agreements at the Customer Relations Committee meeting, but the substance, I think, was the discussion of where we are with the regionalization.
Is the kind of plan here, or maybe we don't have a plan and maybe we need to discuss it, but to have these discussions that are scheduled, and then it seems to me that our board needs to get together and kind of discuss what the schedule is going forward. I mean, for a lot of reasons, pandemic and other things, we've lost some momentum on regionalization. And so it seems to me like we need to get together and talk about how do we move this ball down the field? Is that the plan for the next customer relations meeting?
Go ahead, Diane.
Yeah, I think we need to do that. Both West Des Moines and Urbandale have indicated to us that they have their consultant reports and that they are having meetings. So I think that, we've always had that issue of that sitting out there, and knowing that they wanted to look at it and weigh it. It looks like they're coming to closure on that. And I think that more than anything will probably help move things. We'll know what people's plans are as to whether they're in or out. Do you agree or not, Ted? Or
I agree with that, Diane. I would offer this perspective that we started down this road of trying to answer everybody's questions in large group meetings just before the pandemic, and we had 40 people in the room, and you were all part of that, and we just felt like that wasn't likely going to be effective moving forward. And so now we've had a couple of different folks reach out to us and ask, very specific questions. West Des Moines has questions about how their ASR will be implicated in regionalization, and Altoona has questions about how they will be treated with their emergency connection, and Ankeny has some specific questions about their situation. And so from my perspective, I think we're in a place right now where we're going to meet with them individually. Many of the questions are individual questions. We're going to meet with them individually and try to get those answered. And then I believe that we will have the opportunity to decide what's next. What do we do next? Do we revise our proposal and send it out after we've had an opportunity? The next customer relations meeting is, would be on the calendar for Tuesday. And I'm not sure that we're ready to have that conversation on Tuesday. That is not what I was thinking we would do at the next customer relations committee meeting. I thought we would probably take a week or two and try to meet with people and hear their concerns about their individual questions. Something that I think is very important is, we're not agreeing to anything in these meetings. We're hearing their concerns, and then we're going to try to revise our proposal, which I think is the next step, Graham. But I think the board needs to inform that next step, and whether that happens Tuesday, I tend to think that's too soon, but maybe we have to schedule a customer relations committee meeting, 2 weeks later to have that conversation.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I think that that's important, that those conversations, those one-on-one conversations happen, and they can inform our discussion about what's next. And I don't know, if it has to happen in August, it happens in August. If it happens right after Labor Day, that makes sense too. I mean, I just think, you and I have talked about this, Ted. I mean, we need to continue to develop the strategy and try to move it forward. And I hear what you're saying. Right now, we're in a more information gathering and disseminating situation with one-on-one. But whenever the timing is right, I do think the next time whenever the next time that customer relations committee gets together, that's the real topic, is what's the strategy now?
Yeah. And I think we owe a little bit more information to that committee, and we don't have it yet because those meetings haven't taken place. So yeah, as we look at the next one on the calendar is the 4th. I don't know that we'll have anything to report at that meeting if we want to push it out later in August or just wait till the September meeting. But I think at the next meeting, it would be great, Graham, if we could start to look at timelines and what does that mean? Because Diane continues to remind them, we have some decisions we need to make.
Right.
We can't wait forever. And I think that's the point you're trying to get to. So, but I don't want a false sense of security that we're going to be able to do that by Tuesday, because there's.
Oh, I don't think, I hear you. Tuesday doesn't seem possible. And, maybe the natural date is the normal September meeting of customer relations, but I think that's kind of informed too about what you hear over the next couple of weeks with those one-on-one meetings, whether we have a more urgently scheduled meeting or not.
Yeah.
Is there anything else, Ted, that we would have on the agenda, or do we take that off for next Tuesday?
The plan.
Didn't Michelle cancel it already? Did I see that in my emails?
She did cancel that today.
Yes, that was my direction to her, is that I didn't think we were going to be ready on Tuesday. So we're not planning to have that meeting on Tuesday.
No problem. I just haven't removed it from my calendar, but thanks.
Okay. Yeah, that is the plan.
Okay. Anything else on that? Graham, Bill Stowe Memorial Committee.
Yes, and Andrea can help me with this if I've missed the point here, but we met this morning. We decided it was time to reconvene as a committee, and Amy Beatty was with us, and Liam Stowe from San Francisco, and Zach Voss, who was in Seattle, and Andrea and me and Laura. We were all on the phone to kind of think about how to move forward. And it was my thinking, and I think general agreement of the committee, that we do a few things to make sure that we're ready when the time comes to move forward with this project, which may frankly be next spring. We don't expect to make any fundraising calls or choose a plan or do anything like that, but it probably makes sense to begin to put together a plan, if you will, that we can continue to communicate to people and be a part of this. Obviously, working with the foundation is important, as Ted mentioned earlier today, in our meeting about the small outdoor classrooms, coordinating with them so that those things complement each other is important. And I'll let Andrea talk about this, but there's a water quality initiative that the Parks wants to do. And because the Citizens Water Academy is also not going to operate this year due to the pandemic, we have the ability to do something interesting there. So I'll let Andrea talk about that. This is will be a coordinated effort between the Stowe Memorial Committee, the Park Foundation, and Waterworks.
Andrea, you're muted.
Thank you. This can also be the quick report out for the Des Moines Waterworks Park Foundation Committee. One of the things that we're trying to do is obviously get people into the park, and leading up to Labor Day weekend, we're planning a week-long event that culminates in the Great Egg Hunt. But each day leading up to the egg hunt is a recognized day. One is mind, body, health, where you focus on mind, body, health in the park. Native plantings, you focus on plantings in the park. And the one that we talked about was Water Quality Day, and how to do programming and educational opportunities around water quality. The idea here is that we would, the Stowe Memorial had educational components to it with that talks about water quality and the treatment process that we're going to be incorporated into the building. And this is an opportunity to create to kind of draft those or do a test run and create kind of a tour or walk through the park and use that information that we may use in the educational pieces to kind of start that sharing. So kind of talking through if that's a cell phone tour, if that's a signage tour, but it gets people out in the park on their own time to explore places and locations of the park and learn more about water quality and what Des Moines Waterworks does to ensure clean drinking water for Des Moines and our metro communities. That's one piece of it, and we're excited because it has the opportunity to continue to build that momentum for the Stowe Memorial and kind of test out what the language that we want to possibly use when that memorial is actually constructed and those educational pieces go into it.
I think, that's great, Andrea. I think, this can accomplish a lot of goals for the foundation, for Waterworks, for the Stowe Memorial, and that is, a reminder, an educational piece of what all the things that are going on in the park. Our focus on water quality is actually, is very important. They're talking about the Citizens Water Academy and that sort of thing. And I'll leave with this, and Laura can add anything to it if she wants, but because we're unable to hold a Citizens Water Academy this year, the current thinking is that we can have kind of a larger unveiling next spring for all the pieces of the Stowe Memorial, which could mean the renaming of the Citizens Water Academy, the memorial itself, and all of those things. So in some ways, we could be in a very good position next spring. Hopefully we're no longer sequestered.
Agreed.
Anything else? Okay, the report from the Greater Des Moines Botanical Garden Board, Graham.
Yes. I shared with you guys some thoughts a week and a half ago or so. Ted and I have been talking, and it's been mentioned in this report many times, I think, since Ted became interim director, about the need for us to think about our future relationship with the Botanical Garden. Just as a reminder, so we're all on the same page, we have about 2.5 years left in our original contract. As of right now, I think it terminates at the end of this year on New Year's Eve. But
end of 2022, Graham, right?
Right, that's when it ends. I'm sorry, right? You're correct.
Okay.
So 2.5 years from now. So that leaves us thinking, and it was my thought, as I had mentioned to you folks before, that it would be smart and politically wise of us to initiate a conversation with the garden sooner as opposed to later. And as Ted and I began thinking about this, the timing was kind of perfect. We've got roughly 2 years left in the contract. There's some things that we could think about. And, not surprisingly, and I'll also give you the details. So when this contract was first envisioned, it was envisioned that about $200,000 a year would be provided by Des Moines Waterworks to the Botanical Garden in terms of in-kind contributions. Some of our personnel would go over there to fix things, to help with, and to staff parts that that the garden didn't have because it was a new organization. That's happened slightly and not so much. It's difficult for us to use our staff all the time. We use our staff, I think, Ted, the number you gave me was about $26,000 worth of in-kind contribution was made. The rest of it we have done in a cash contribution each year to the Botanical Gardens to get to our $200,000. And that was by mutual agreement. It was frankly easier for us to donate the money than it was to try to schedule staff in the middle of the night to go take care of certain issues. Also, when I first joined the board and was involved in this, and the Botanical Garden had yet to become a foundation, the original agreement that was written said that Des Moines Waterworks would provide free water to the garden. We did amend that agreement before the foundation became an entity and put some limits on that water. They have used about, and Ted will correct me if I'm wrong, about $95,000 worth of water. Is that correct, Ted?
Yeah, that sounds right, Graham. I don't have the dollar figure loaded here, but they've used about 30 million. I can find that number.
That's fine. We'll provide that to you. So that's kind of how the agreement has been written. And the Botanical Garden has been successful. I mean, the pandemic has caused a certain problem for them, for visitors, but as I have shared with you, their last fiscal year, they actually operated very well. The diners at the restaurant were up, the gift shop had done well, the number of visitors had continued to climb, and they had actually made a little bit of money. So, I mean, they were doing pretty well. Now, they're obviously, like anybody, in an unknown period, but they are continuing to do a lot of online programming, which I think makes sense for them and is keeping people involved and hopefully encouraging them to remain members for those who are annual members. So that being said, there's a couple of ways to look at this, right? I mean, our contract expires 2022. And if this was a purely business situation, we could walk away from that contract. And it's something obviously that is an option for us. From a community and political standpoint, I might argue that it could be wise for us to discuss a more gradual exit. And that's what Ted and I have been discussing. Think of it this way without, and I'll caution you a little bit. What I want to talk about is, and get people's feedback on the approach. We should all be a little bit mindful that we're we're also in a tad bit of a negotiation with them, and so I don't want to get too specific on numbers. We can, but for starting points, let's paint with broad brushes, and then we can talk about details if we need to. But the concept is to have more of a phase-out agreement, and to help us plan and to help the garden plan. The most important thing for us, and I think to our ratepayers, is that we phase out of the financial contribution to the garden quicker. The water piece of it is something that we can handle a little bit easier than the cash payments. And so if we were considering a phase out, because we are comfortably in this 2-year, and you added on a 3-year phase out, that gives us 5 years between now and then. But it's clear to us, it's clear to our ratepayers, and it would be clear to the Botanical Garden that at the end of 5 years, our relationship ceases. And so that's kind of where Ted and I have started with this process. I'll let Ted add anything that I have forgotten, and then we can have some discussion.
I think you did it justice, Graham. You were right on with your 95,000 over the dollars worth of water over the first 7.5 years. I think that the rest of what you shared is where we're currently thinking, and an opportunity for other board members to share perspective.
And I'll just add, and I promise I'll stop talking, is that as we think about this, I mean, our job is to think about our ratepayers, which is exactly why I think it's wise for us to create the exit strategy. I think that's in the best interest of us, especially as we look at with our regional partners, but also understand that there is a dynamic here that not everybody's going to share that view, especially those very close to the Botanical Garden board. So that's part of the reason I advocate for more of a gradual step down. But with that, I'll stop talking.
You know, I remember when Buzz Brenton and Tom Urban came and presented the idea, and we were thrilled, absolutely thrilled that, you know, there was this vision for what it would become. And I think it has become that. I question the 3 years, and I don't know why that's the right amount. Maybe it is, but you know, with 2.5 years left, that's another 50% from right now beyond what we thought we would actually do, or 25%, I guess, at the end. I am curious if the costs that you went over, and thanks for having those, are those incurred only by inside City of Des Moines customers, or are those costs divided out throughout the region? Do we know?
I'm guessing that Peggy can help us with that question. Peggy, can you tell us whether in the cost of service that 200,000 that goes to the BC is broadly shared, or is that Des Moines customers?
I would have to double check, Ted, but I do believe that those costs are allocated to the inside City of Des Moines customers, not across the whole region.
Okay, thank you. We can follow up on that, Sue, to be more sure.
I think that's important, especially as we're having the regional discussions, because at some point it's going to get down to, you know, what outstanding commitments do you have within the region? And the other question, and I know this is just a nit, but after we went through what we did on the zoo, are we set up with meters to appropriately meter what's being used at the garden? For instance, is the restaurant on a separate meter and they're paying a separate bill to us, and any of the water outside? I mean, do we really know how much water is being used for each of the amenities? And again, it's only because we just recently had the zoo situation that if we're talking about exiting, I don't think we want to have any surprises to them or to us as to how much water is being spent and by, or used and by whom?
I'd have to follow up on that, Sue. I don't know that we separate out their outdoor water use from their inside the dome use. I suspect that the restaurant has an individual meter, but I would need to follow up on that to be sure. But we can certainly ask those questions and get them answered pretty quickly.
And did this idea of extending it for 3 years, did that come about from their request, or are we just saying that it would be a nice thing to do?
Yeah, no, none of this came from them. This was, discussions, frankly, that started before Ted's time. Bill and I have discussed this, and then Ted and I have discussed this too, about how do we, how do we end this contract? And frankly, my assumption is that there is going to be some political pressure to for us to maintain a forever relationship with the garden, which I don't think is appropriate for Des Moines Waterworks to consider. And so, I think it was probably my idea to figure out a way to gradually get out of this, so that there wasn't 1 year we're giving them a couple $100,000 and some water, and the next year they get nothing. And that I thought that possibly by providing a phase out agreement might be a little bit more palatable, especially since we can go to them now when no one's really thinking about the end of the contract, and tie this up before there's a panic on the garden side. That I can just tell you, as a board member at the garden, I don't think that, well, I know for a fact, because Chris Hensley turns her chair to me at about every meeting and announces to the group that the Des Moines Waterworks needs to renew its 10-year agreement as soon as possible, so that the garden can plan on that forever. And so that's part of the reason why I wanted for us to offer something different that could gracefully get us out of a political showdown with some people.
Well, thank you, Graham, because I remember specifically the 10 years was pitched to us by Buzz and by Tom, that more than enough time for them to get on their feet and do what they need to do. So yeah, thank you for representing that it's not a forever contract.
Yeah, well, I'm interested. This is not an action item. This is an information item. I'm interested in trying to figure out, from our perspective as a board, number one, whether or not there's any interest in doing this at all. And number two, what if there is, how that would be put forward. So I guess we talked about putting this question in a committee posture to get some kind of recommendation to us. I think, I look at it and I think about it, and I think 10 years is a long time that they had with our support, that really nobody else there's no other attraction in the city that has that at all. So it's been, I think, probably a tremendous advantage to them. I think there was another piece of it too in the agreement, and Sue and Graham, you can refresh us on that there was supposed to be some water quality.
Yeah.
That went through this, and it's my understanding there's been not any of that.
Right. Let me address both of those things. Yes, I'm the first to say our Des Moines Waterworks relationship with the Botanical Garden is odd. It's unique. We got there because where we were was worse. At some point, this board took over full management, and so this was our, get out of a bad situation card. And I think it's working pretty well. I think that the garden is doing pretty well. I think that Sue's description of Buzz Brenton and Tom Urban and Fred Weitz and those other people who, and Janice Ruan and others who stepped forward, their hope was that in 10 years, this entity would be self-sustaining, and they're darn close. I mean, thanks to the Ruans and others, the Ruans are almost single-handedly sponsoring the second phase of the garden. I mean, they're making good on that promise. What was it? The second part of the question was, the water quality. Yes, the one thing in the agreement that was on our side was that there might be some sort of focus on water quality, and that is something that has never been realized. And in an initial discussion that Ted and I had over at the garden, I brought that up, and then they had some ideas about going forward. But in my view, and again, this is just me speaking, with all the things that we have to do to influence public opinion on water quality and all of those other things, I think if we do have limited dollars to spend, we probably can spend those dollars better elsewhere than we can in sponsoring events at the garden. And so that doesn't have much interest to me. I really think that the thing that we have to consider is what's going to be the easiest and best way for us to maneuver out of this contract. As I say, we could send a message and say, year 10, we're out. I'm just going to be very honest with you. Think about those names that I just read to you that are big sponsors of the park and many of the things that we do. A cold departure at the end of 10 years is going to be met with some more than a little resistance. And so that's why I'm encouraging that we consider something that's a little more gradual.
Well, it is 2.5 years. And again, I think we need to have a discussion. We just put a charge on all of our customers for distribution infrastructure improvement. And, I am very concerned that we have money available to do that. So.
Absolutely. You are 100% right. And that's why, as I say, to me, figuring out the financial payments that we're making is the most important thing to us. And then working on the water could possibly be something that comes a little bit slower.
Graham, I also didn't want you and Ted to be put in an awkward position. The way I was reading the message, you were going to have a smaller group of individuals from the Botanical Garden that would talk about this. Was that what you meant by the smaller group?
Yeah, I mean, what I would like to do, and I think might make sense, is for us to have some sort of a conversation of ideas with the Botanical Garden. And, I've had a conversation with Stacy Johnson, who's the chair, and with Stephanie Judela, who's the executive director over there, and said, I'm just telling you as one board member and as a joint board member of both boards, that time is probably coming, that this is going to end. I felt they needed to hear that message directly, and Ted was in the room with me when I did it, because while those of us on the Des Moines Waterworks board may have seen this as a 10-year agreement, I can tell you that is not how it's viewed by a lot of board members over at the Botanical Garden. They may be wrong. They may not have been in that room when Buzz Brenton and Tom Urban said those things. But it was important to deliver that message. And I think that they understand that we're looking for the exit. There's just a question about when that exit is.
Yeah, and I want us as a board to have that as soon as you message to them that we'll have an exit strategy that extends beyond the 10 years. That becomes the base from which we work. And to me, that takes away any decision that we have on, how we feel about the 10-year contract that we entered into and whether or not we're willing to extend it at all. So that's why I'd like to committee to do it before there's any indication to them that, gosh, we're looking at something that extends beyond the 10 years, that ratchets down and continues cash payments.
Well, okay, a couple of things. I would have to look back through some minutes of our meetings, but Ted and I have been discussing having this meeting with the garden, and I have mentioned it in the report in the agenda, that this item in the agenda for at least 6 months, with the idea that, you know, we needed to think about some sort of a graceful exit, and even a gradual exit like this. So it's hardly news. Matter of fact, that I mentioned it at the last meeting that Ted and I would have.
You said that there were expectations on the part of board members there that we would up our contribution, as I recall.
Right, and that Ted and I would have a conversation with the folks over at the garden, which is what we did. And we had frank talk with them that, you know, the thought of continuing our 10-year agreement was not going to be possible, but that we would retreat into our own corner and put some thoughts together about, you know, what that could mean, which Ted has begun to do, but we haven't shared anything with the others yet. I will say this: there's 3 options, right? I mean, one is the contract ends in 2022 and we do nothing. The second option is that something like I proposed, that there's a gradual payout. The third option is one that I don't think anybody would support, and that is there's an ongoing relationship with the entity. I don't know. As I say, I don't know how we get to a resolution here. It was my hope that Ted and I could work on this option of a gradual extension, and then bring that to the board for discussion. The board could then turn it down if they wanted to. I didn't expect that we would have a public discussion about the details of what the gradual extension would be, and then take it for that. That's not how I thought the negotiation would work.
Okay.
It seems to me that, as you just laid it out there, Graham, the 3 pretty clear options, and within the middle option, there's some flexibility or, you know, some negotiation that has to take place. And, you know, this botanical garden thing has been unbelievable for its entire history. Why we ever even got involved in the first place, it was because it was better than the other option, which was significantly more pilot payment. Yeah. We operated it for a while and that became burdensome. And, you know, why did we get involved in this ongoing support agreement? Because it was better than the other option. You know, I tended to believe that we need to do something now that's better than the other option. And ongoing support, I think, is, you know, the other option. We don't want to do that. I think it would be better to do something other than that. We have provided a great deal of support to the botanical garden. And when we get to the end of this agreement, I think we will have met our obligation. But I also think if we just end it right there, that's going to be a tremendous cliff, and people are going to point to that tremendous cliff and make that look bad. And it seems that we could get a little direction even here today about, you know, what's the board's sense of, is it 10 years and out? Is it transition, or is it continuing support?
Graham, can you, are you able to remind me or share with me for the first time what percentage of our contribution is their budget, their overall?
Oh, no, I'd have to think about that. I'd have to get you the number. I don't want to even guess at it because I don't have that in front of me.
Okay.
It's significant. I mean, we're a large donor. remember, a lot of their donations come in for capital improvements. I mean, they're like the Ruans paying for the garden, and so that's not for operations. They have gotten and received significant support from the city for also some capital improvement, but some operation, like the HVAC system and others, they use sales tax dollars for. There are some programming dollars, I think, that come through Kemen and others, but in a vague answer to your question, we're a top donor.
I'm just curious how steep that cliff is.
It would, the loss of the 200 grand. If we were to pull today out of there, would be unrecoverable for them. Now they should be planning for that from 2.5 years from now. But even so, I think in this particular time of the pandemic, it's hard for them. Not that it's our job to bail them out of the pandemic, but I think the walk away at year 10, regardless of a promise that some of these founders made at the beginning, is going to be a significant cliff.
And I want to remind everybody, it's not just the $200,000 cash payment. There's also $95,000 worth of free water that when,
right.
Yeah.
Right. And that, just remember that $95,000 is cumulative. That's all the water.
That's over the 10 years.
Over the last, yeah, that's 7.5 years.
Oh, right. It's $10,000 to $15,000 a year in water.
Okay.
And $200,000 in kind, which to Graham's point has become 80 or 90% just straight cash payments.
And that's got to stop. I mean, obviously that's the thing we've got to focus on.
So Graham, when you talk about a gradual, can you share with us what you mean by that? Are you talking about a third, a third, a third? Are you talking, I mean, what?
No.
Because I think that's where it would be helpful for you and Ted to have kind of the feeling of the board. So before you would have any additional meetings, you'd know whether or not it's something that the board would be receptive to. Or do they do 10 and walk?
Right. Well, yeah, that's right.
You've got a visitor coming into your room.
Oh, I'm sure he just got back from a walk. Which means he's calm, so he's not going to do what he did this morning. But anyway, here's my thought on this is that, or what I might ask, my request is that you allow Ted and us to have a bit of a discussion about what that is. I think, this is just me talking, a third. I would like something more aggressive than that, because I'd like to lessen that final year pain. So I guess I haven't really thought it through. And so my request would be that you allow Ted and I to go to them, answer Andrea's question about, what this means to them, and get so that when we come back to the board, we can provide real numbers to you about what percentage of the funds raised come from Waterworks today and how they're going to phase that back, and allow the Botanical Garden some opportunity to tell us, just like they're going to have to tell the community, how they're going to fill that void going forward. So I'm not answering your question, Sue, because I really don't know. But I'd like to have the opportunity to talk to the garden to figure out the best way out. And again, I don't think there's any great magic in the 3 years. It's just as we sat down and started talking about timing, 5 years is a nice round number. And it doesn't mean that each of the step downs in those 3 out years have to be the same. They can be greater in the first 2. It was a starting point, right, Ted? I mean, it was just a round number for us to start thinking about.
Yeah, I feel like this is going to be a negotiation and we need to start somewhere. And I think it's important for the board to be on the same page in terms of Graham's 3 options. And if we're not even there yet, it makes it really hard for us to have a discussion about what the steps in the middle option look like.
Yeah, and the issue that I have with having a discussion with some people about this is it creates the expectation that we're in a negotiation on a step down.
And that we're willing to do something beyond the 10 years. That's where I think we put you in a bad position, Graham, because you go in and say, well, what if we did this? And then you bring it back to the board and the board says no. Then, you know, that doesn't look good. So
well, I'm not so worried about that. I mean, it just, as I say, my whole approach with this was not to go in and promise that the board was going to, you know, sign off on some negotiation that I had, because frankly, it's not even a negotiation, right? I mean, we don't have anything to negotiate. As Diane pointed out, the one return on investment that's in the original contract was some sort of water quality initiative has never been realized. Our only return on, the great return that we're getting for our ratepayers is that at some point we're going to be out of this, and in return, the community has gotten a very vibrant attraction, which they have. But I don't know. I feel that this is the board. If you accept my request, the board has an option, and the option is going to be the 10-year, ending the 10-year contract, or this other thing that we may or may not be able to decide with the board. Or with the garden. I will just say that if you're willing to face the pressure that will come and end the 10-year contract, we can do that. This may be a more graceful exit for everyone involved. And as I say, allows what I believe to be a strong community asset to be out there. I will say one last thing, and that is that, you know, I think the real goal here, and the thing that we have to remember, is what we don't want to be is put into a position of having to support another entity like this, or to be providing free water to another entity. And so it's very important that regardless of what we do, that it is a final exit strategy.
I would agree. You know what I'm wondering, we do have 2.5 years. Could we get the answers to our questions? You know, Andrea was asking what % of the total budget. I was asking about the meters, and is the restaurant set up separately, and where is the water being, you know, used? Is it the outdoor gardens, the indoor? Could we just have that as, you know, at a committee meeting or shared with the board? And then I think we'd be able to give you maybe more information, more of an indication as to, you know, if it is time to go in and get their feel. Just as an idea.
Yeah, I mean, we can. Go ahead, Andrea, I'm sorry.
I do like knowing the answers to those questions, but I would also add that I would support you having a conversation exploring some options. I don't want, Botanical Gardens are a great community asset. The zoo is a great community asset. And I don't want Des Moines Waterworks to appear to be the axe chopping down all of these partnerships in the past 12 months without doing what we can to the burden of our support no longer being there. So I would appreciate you taking the time to kind of explore that a little bit without making promises, but just so we have a better idea, we do have some options.
I appreciate that. I mean, I think that's a good way to look at it, Andrea, is that, you know, you have to have a lot of discussions, and they're not really negotiations, right? They're frankly no different than the ongoing conversations we've had with our regional partners. You know, we have to go out and have some fact finding and some exchange of ideas, and maybe even some thoughts on a proposal. And that's all I'm asking that we be allowed to do here, is to have a conversation to figure out ways that we can end this contract other than just walking away at the end of year 10. And again, the board will have full opportunity to discuss whether that is acceptable to them or not. My going out and having my and Ted going out and having a conversation about what's possible with the Botanical Garden is no different than the hundreds of conversations that have gone on between board members and staff members in our regional partners. Nothing has been promised because of those conversations.
We do not have any contract with them on, you know, on that ends at the end of a period. I mean, I just am very
except for their purchase capacity.
Their purchase
agreements.
Capacity, which goes on and on and on. And,
right, and that they're customers of ours that
right.
has an ongoing agreement with us to buy something. But go ahead.
I just am. I'm fairly sure we're going to be backed into a corner. There's going to be no way once you go and raise an extension opportunity that we'll be able to do anything but extend.
I'm just, as I say, I'll make the argument one more time. I think that there's going to be a significant amount of pressure for us to do something after year 10. And I would urge you to consider what is the best option. And is the best option for us to just sit here and wait for it to be year 10?
No, I
and then get the pressure, or to be
have 2.5 years to do this. But I also think that if we go and negotiate beyond 10 years, that is the expectation. And that it will be very difficult to do anything but. So that's, I mean, that's my point of view on it.
Well, let us get the answers to the questions that have been raised. Do we want to try to have this discussion at one of the August committee meetings? Either planning, which is, as we've already discussed, next Tuesday, or finance and audit?
We can get some answers by finance and audit, I guess.
Okay.
Well, I guess my question is, I don't know how we resolve the question that's been raised by Diane, and that is whether we can have a discussion with the Botanical Garden without a vote of the board or not. Because if we need a vote of the board, that's going to happen at the end of August. And I would just say that I would be, you know, I think that's an odd way to behave, that basically we're going to negotiate this deal in public at a board meeting.
But I think I'd like the questions, the answers to the questions, to look at it and understand the context.
What are the questions again?
What I've written down, Graham, is the percent of the total budget for the Botanical Center represented by our contributions, and the existence of metering for the restaurant and possibly the outdoor water usage at the garden. And I think that I also want to know whether the restaurant is currently paying for their water or if they're part of the free water. And I guess I'm hopeful that understanding what percentage of their budget our contribution represents will help us understand how much of a cliff we're talking about, and if it is truly significant, that will inform whether we would like to create an exit strategy to soften that cliff.
So with those, by answering those questions, then what happens once those questions are answered?
Well, I think people will get a better idea of, you know, are we out in 10? Are we willing to do that? Or do we want to try to soften it?
And could you please confirm when you write down those questions? I just want to make sure it is all under the City of Des Moines ratepayers. Everyone thinks it is, but could we confirm that?
Yes.
Because at a time, there were certain things that were regional amenities that that's the reason I had brought up the question about, is it city, you know, ratepayers paying or overall?
I appreciate that question. I didn't even think that that could be split out, but that's good to know. You're right, it is a regional amenity.
And the reason that I think that it's not, Sue, and this could have changed over all of these years, of course, but initially when we got into actual operation of the botanical garden, it was instead of a dramatic increase in our pilot payment that the city had asked for. And as I recall at that time, we said, well, we'll take over operation, but any loss that we incur will go to the city. But let us confirm that, because it's been so many years and we need to know.
So we'll look at that in finance and audit.
Yeah, we can get those answers for then. I'm still unclear about the next step then.
Well, I would think, you know, if, I don't know. If it's a negotiation and we're talking about it like that, you know, is it something that we can do in closed session, not do in closed session? Do we need to have, I think we do need to have an indication of, are we willing to go and, you know, make this kind of offer? There should be some kind of sense of the board before we go out there and do it, because there's no pulling it back. I think there's no pulling it back afterwards.
I don't know why. I don't understand that. I mean, we would come back, Ted and I would work on some sort of proposal after having discussions with the Botanical Garden about what the cliff was and what their things were. And we'd try to figure out a way to do this. And then, like every other agenda item, we would come back to the board, and the board would have the opportunity to vote yes or no on the item. Nobody ever forces any of us to vote yes or no on an item. I don't know why we would feel that this would be the case with this one.
I think you talk about the political pressure, and I think it applies here too. Then you have individuals who have come and talked about opportunities and deals that could be struck, and then it puts other people in very bad position.
I don't know what that means.
Okay.
Well, a question that I have for Rick, and I know we aren't, this is not an action item, and so we're not taking the action today.
No.
But Rick, would the position of the board on whether or not there's a willingness to extend the agreement beyond 10 years, would that potentially be an action item, or could that be something that is discussed at a committee meeting with
Let's think about that for a second. Think about what you just said for a second. The board would take an action item on whether it was willing to extend the contract or not. Then if they said, yes, we're willing to extend the contract, then we go into negotiation with everyone knowing we've already agreed to extend the contract. The very thing that Diane is trying to prevent from happening, she's got it upside down. What I'm proposing is we have some discussions and put out a plan to see if it's feasible to extend the conversation, and then we have a vote. I don't understand the having the vote first and then deciding what the contract looks like. It's backwards.
If I could say, responding to your question, Ted, I think the board doesn't have to have a vote in order to have individual board members express an intention. And a conclusion I have drawn from listening to all of the discussion today is that there is substantial sentiment on the board to not do any extension, but there's some sentiment on the board that a phasing out may be acceptable on terms that have yet to be determined. So at this point, I would say that the sense of the board that's been declared is there won't be any continuation on of the contract as it was before, that it's either going to be terminated full stop, or some members of the board are willing to consider some measure of extension. And I don't know if that would allow sufficient declaration of intent in order for there to be discussions to be conducted after questions are answered in the F&A. Not sure that was your question, but I think maybe it was.
I'm certainly responsive. I guess my proposal at this point is that we get answers to the questions, we discuss it at F&A, and we look for a path forward at that point. And I'm not confident that I could articulate what the optional paths forward might be at this point, but hopefully answers to the question will help inform that slate of options, and we'll pick one at the end of F&A.
Okay, maybe I'm trying to make this too simple, but if we get the answers to the questions, then wouldn't Graham and Ted have the information and kind of know the guardrails of where the board is? And like Rick said, whether it's this board is not receptive to renewing it for 10 years, it's either full stop or something in between, so that then a discussion could happen. But I think right now we're guessing at some of these questions, and if it's this, then this. So we could easily resolve this, I think, by just answering those questions and then kind of setting up the parameters, not a vote, not a private meeting, but just like I think you could get a sense as to where everyone is on this call, it would give you, Ted, and you, Graham, more information for the next meeting. I might be trying to simplify it too much.
You simplified it enough for me to follow, and seems like that would be a reasonable plan. Thank you for articulating that.
It's fine with me.
Okay.
So we will bring those answers to F&A or provide them before as we have them.
Okay. Staff update, source water quality update.
Yes, this is our long-awaited discussion of recent water quality trends in the rivers. Graham had actually asked some time ago, with the understanding that we were in the middle of some other things at the time, but just for an update on where we are on water quality. There hadn't been a lot of discussion about it in the last few months, and so I've asked Kyle to put together some information on what we're seeing in terms of trends in water quality and our source water. So Kyle, take it away.
Thanks, Ted. Can you see my PowerPoint screen?
Yes, I can.
Okay, very good. Well, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to be able to share this with you on some of the trends that we've been seeing. I will go through this quickly. We'll show up several graphs and trends to kind of give you an indication of what we've been seeing historically and also in the last several years. The first, if we had to narrow it down to 4 challenges, what are those? Well, certainly nitrates, and we're all familiar with the challenges that we have with nitrates, and we fight to be compliant with those to stay within the MCLs of 10 milligrams per liter. TOCs, this obviously has big impacts on our disinfection byproducts out in the distribution systems. We want to maintain low total organic carbon levels to minimize those disinfection byproducts in the distribution system. Ammonia, this particular challenge here impacts our disinfection. It takes 7 parts of chlorine to neutralize 1 part of ammonia. So it obviously impacts our chlorination process greatly when we have high ammonia concentrations in the rivers. And then lastly, algae, cyanobacteria, and cyanotoxins. These are the buzzwords from the last 6 years as a result of lots of studies that are being conducted right now on EPA health advisories that have been issued, and what we're seeing even this week and last week, seeing these challenges facing right now. All of you know water quality issues are real in Iowa. Being in the public role, health role, we see this very clearly. And we've had very close calls. Our margins are very narrow. We'll kind of go through some of those and the challenges that we've had and some of the close calls that we've had because of the struggles that we have with our source waters. This graph is very busy. Don't get hung up on all the details, but I think it really paints a good picture of the seasons of the river. This is the graph of 2019. The blue is the nitrates. If you follow along with my cursor, early in January of 2019, we had nitrates near 8 milligrams per liter. As the year went on, nitrates started to decline, where they then plummeted. This plummeting was likely a result of the thawing or the river breakup, rivers, higher quantities in the rivers, flood stages. So as there's declining, then we are seeing the opposite with TOC and ammonia levels spiking. This is what is a really common occurrence every spring when the snow melt occurs and the ice breaks up, scouring the bottom of the river, bringing a lot of organics with it. We get these 2 source water concerns during that breakup period. As that water passes the treatment plants and goes downstream, we start to see the nitrates climb again, likely a result of additional nutrients being applied on farm fields. Continues to climb through the summer months. Farm crops start to grow, bring in some of that nutrients. We also at the same time are starting to see water temperatures increase in the rivers, which then starts to foster the growth of algae and cyanobacterias along with the uptake from crops. So the nitrogen levels or nitrate levels start to decline in the rivers. At that time, you can see in the yellow is when microsystems or the toxins start to form in the rivers and start to climb up. And those will then decline over time. Then we get into the fall months where the nitrogen is being reapplied to the farm fields, more runoff, crops are being removed from the fields, so there's no longer uptake, and we see higher nitrogen levels or nitrate levels in the rivers for the remainder of the year. So it gives you kind of a good indication of how that the source water challenges change throughout the year. Let's start with nitrates. I think you're all familiar with this graph. We've updated it through this year. It's clearly showing that the concentrations over the time in the last 50 years have certainly are on the upward trend. Though we've had some periods where there was brief periods of lower nitrate levels, much that we're in the last few years have been lower. The overall trend from history is showing that we continue to trend upward with the concentrations. We'll zoom in a little bit on the last 5 years of nitrates in the rivers. The blue lines is the Raccoon River, the orange is the Des Moines River, and the gray is the Gallery. Obviously the Gallery, being under the influence of the river, is always less and was our first source that we choose. But then you can see that the nitrates the last few years have been a little lower, but we can see in 15, the nitrates were very high. In times we had even near 18, certainly over 15, but the last 3 years have been typically below 10 milligrams per liter, which is good. But we don't know that that's a sustained outcome that we're going to continue to see over the next few years. How do we deal with nitrate compliance? Well, we've had a near miss in 2013 where nitrogen levels in the rivers were very high. Demand was going up. The nitrate facility was running at max capacity, but demand continued to come up. And as all of you know, we use the nitrate vessels to dilute water, and part of it is bypassed through the system. So as demand continues to climb, that dilution ratio becomes reduced. And in 2013, we were faced with some tough challenges where we were seeing the nitrate levels declining slowly in the rivers, but demand was coming up quicker than we were seeing the decline. Luckily, the nitrogen levels did drop just before demand continued to go up, and we missed a violation within a day and a half of that. So we are very fortunate to have the capacity that we did, but it was too close of a call, even with all the tools that we had and trying to manage that and looking at the different sources that we could use to find the least concentrations. Certainly, our preference is to look at the rivers to see which ones are the lowest. We pick those at Fluor Drive in the Raccoon or the Des Moines River and use the ion exchange system for that. At Saylorville, we have the RO process that removes nitrates. But at McMullen, we have neither of those options. And so we have to use off-river storage, that being Crystal Lake or Maffick Reservoir. We're very fortunate to have the reservoir that has very low nitrate water. And so we can use that to blend in with the radio collector wells and Crystal Lake to reduce the nitrates below the MCL. This graph shows several things. First of all, it's showing how many days the nitrates were above 10 MGL, being the Raccoon River, the kind of the purple or the lighter shade of purple, the Des Moines River, the darker shade, how many days the nitrate removal facility is run is the green, and then the blue is the gallery concentrations. You can again see clearly in 2008 to 2012, we had a very low year where we did not have a lot of days above 10 milligrams per liter in our source waters. We are seeing a similar trend right now that we're not seeing a lot of days over that 10 milligrams per liter. But you can see in 2013, 2014, and 2015, it came back very quickly. In fact, 2015, we set records that year of high concentrations in there. So even though we had a lull over a few years, does not mean that the improvements are being done upstream, that's a permanent fix that we could be seeing from years to come. This graph also shows that we've created several or built several other infrastructures that allows us other tools to be able to minimize our river usage during these events. The McMullen treatment plant was constructed in 2000. Two ASRs that we own was constructed in 2007. The Saylorville plant in 2011. Ankeny constructed their ASR in 2013. And finally, the Army Post ASR was constructed in 2018. All of these gives us additional tools that we can use to minimize how much water we have to produce here at Fluor Drive. If need be, we can take additional water at McMullen, take water from the reservoir, and really reduce the amount of water we need here at Fluor. The same with the ASRs. If need be, to stay in compliance and to reduce the amount of production that we need to produce here at Fluor Drive, we could turn on the ASRs. Same with Saylorville, maximizing that production. Even with all of those tools in 2015, we still had 177 days that we had to run the vessels. So we have some options, but clearly we've seen that concentrations in the river can even create great challenges for us. Not only concentrations that we need to look at, but also loading of the river. This graph shows the metric tons of nitrogen that are going downstream in the Raccoon River. It's really clear to show that trend line is also continuing to go up, even though we've seen lower concentrations in the river recently in the last few years. Talk a little bit about TOC. This graph shows the raw water TOC, both for all three on the Raccoon River, the Des Moines River, and the Gallery. You can see several spikes that occur with those graphs. TOCs typically go up again in the spring melt time, where we're getting a lot of organic matter being stirred off the bottom from the ice breakup and the melt. But we can get it other times, but that's where you're going to see those spikes. Here we'll zoom in a little bit. The last 4 years, you can see that these spikes have occurred every spring, about typically in March, is when we're seeing the rivers break up, and that's when we're really fighting poor source waters at that time. And so having high TOCs Though we can reduce the TOCs in the treatment process, we cannot completely eliminate them, and we want to pick the source that is the lowest. Historically, the Raccoon River is peaks in there. We have the quickest incline in there, so we'll switch to the Des Moines River. When we have this breakup of the ice, Saylorville does do some buffering with that, but then staggers on longer. And so you'll see that though the TOCs in the Des Moines River are usually lower, they can last longer. And so it's not always a source that we use for long periods of time. Here's a graph to talk about a little bit more about TOCs. Here in the first quarter of 2014, we had average levels of 1.6 milligrams per liter the first 45 days, which were ideal. Where the last 45 days we had levels of 3.4 milligrams per liter in that. Success relies on having finished values of 1.5 milligrams per liter range in the treatment process. So if we're higher than that, that's when we're going to see the TTHMs forming in the distribution system, where we can have some exceedance with those. This shows the graph since 2007 to current of filter effluent TOCs here at Fluor Drive. You can see the large spike that occurred in 2014. When we talk about trihalomethanes or how that affects in the distribution system, you can see in 2012 through 2014, this area where we had much higher TTHMs in the distribution system. Ideally, we want water leaving the plant to be below 0.04. It will typically double out into the distribution system. The MCL is 0.08. So the last 5 years, we've done very well. We've made some changes in the treatment process, doing enhanced softening. We have online instruments that check the TTHMs leaving the plant. We're also taking samples out in the distribution system to monitor that. But we did have an exceedance in 2014 as a result of higher TOCs and higher TTHMs in the distribution system during that time. But you can see the last 5 years, we have stayed below our goals there of leaving the plant of 0.04. Ammonia. Again, ammonia is something that typically occurs in the rivers in spring breakup. We get a lot of the snow melt. We've actually done, the lab has done tests where they've melted snow and they can see high concentrations of ammonia in the snow melt. And we see that coming down the plant. In 2014, we had quite a bit of ammonia levels, both in the Raccoon River and in the Des Moines River. But you can see the last several years, the peaks are always occurring right during the springtime where we're getting those high levels of ammonia. Here's a graph on filter effluent. Again, 2013, 2014, you can see we're having some concentrations there. Anytime we get above 0.1 milligrams per liter in our filter effluent, we have to dose that very highly with chlorine to keep a chlorine residual in the distribution system. So when you see these peaks in 2018 and in 2014, where we're getting greater than 0.7 milligrams per liter, we are adding probably 5 to 6 times the amount of chlorine to the water leaving the plant to be able to neutralize that ammonia before it's pushed out into the distribution system to maintain that free chlorine residual. And so ammonia is a very big challenge in the springtime. A lot of times we have to fill additional storage containers with sodium hypochlorite because the storage containers that we do have will be depleted so quickly because we're feeding such a high amount of chlorine to be able to neutralize the ammonia in the water. Algae and cyanobacteria. Again, this has been a hot topic the last several years. So we'll kind of highlight some of this. Why is this important? Well, many of you have probably seen photos on the internet or the news showing blue-green algae, but it is in our backyard. This is in 2014, just upstream in our watershed, Saylorville Lake Marina, where we had a blue-green algae outbreak occur in the marina. This is a real personal topic for me. certainly in my role here, having making sure we have good source waters, be able to treat the water for our customers and to meet our needs is very important to avoid the toxins that we have, but also for recreational. As someone that enjoys using the waters of the state, be able to use those for recreational purposes. Nobody wants to be out swimming in this or boating in waters like this that we see. It's certainly has a lot of negative impacts on the community, not just for source waters. What affects cyanobacteria growth? There's a lot of things that affect it. Obviously, one of those is nutrient availability. The high nitrates that are being seen in our source waters, I believe, has a big impact on why we're seeing these blue-green algae outbreaks. Certainly calm water and the water flow rate also impacts that, where Saylorville Reservoir allows that growth to occur more easily than we would see in the Raccoon River that typically has more turbid waters. Many of you may recall in August 2014 with the Toledo, Ohio, where they had an algae outbreak that occurred, resulting in 500 of their residents having an issue they do not drink or do not cook order because of that. As a result of that order that was done, the EPA created a health advisory on 2 cyanobacteria toxins, that being microcystin and Slendospor-opsin. They issued a 10-day drinking water health advisory to combat those 2 toxins that can be found in cyanobacteria, directly a result of the Toledo, Ohio incident. Although these are not regulatory requirements, we treat them as a regulatory requirement. And so even though we're not required to do that, we continue to follow these guidelines and notify the public as they are regulatory requirements. As a result of this, we created a cyanotoxin management plan that has 4 stages. We review bacteria counts that trigger toxin analysis and looking at our different locations in our source waters to confirm to see if we have toxins within that blue-green algae. Not all blue-green algae will have toxins, but it can be formed, and as the higher the counts are that we see in that, is likely a higher result that there could be some toxins in there. Conventional treatment will remove or reduce some of the toxins, but it will not remove it completely. And so it's really important that we look at our source waters and have accurate data of what the toxin levels are to try to avoid those and timely information to make some good decisions on how do we avoid those levels. And this graph talks about the algae. Obviously, algae has been around. Algae is not cyanobacteria. They're 2 different issues. However, algae can have a great impact on the treatment process. Algae can foul filters requiring multiple backwashes to occur and can actually reduce our production at the plants down significantly because of the amount of backwashes that we have. The last several years, we have not had big algae counts on there, but in 2014 and 2015 era, we did have some algae counts on the Raccoon River that were significant. Here's the Cyanobacteriographs. Again, the Raccoon River being the blue lines and the Des Moines River being the orange lines. You can see historically, we do have cyanobacteria forming in the Des Moines River. Again, likely as a result of Saylorville Reservoir and the calm waters that are occurred there. We do not see as much typically in the Raccoon River, but in 2016, you can see the big spike that occurred that caught us off guard on that, which we had not really seen historically in the past with that. Nearly 2 years after the Toledo, Ohio incident to the day, we had an incident occur here at Des Moines Waterworks. Cyanobacteria counts were high on both rivers going into the weekend. We stayed on the Raccoon River because the Des Moines River had detectable toxin levels. Though they were low, we were starting to get some detectable levels. Lab results done on August 1st indicated a river change was needed. We clearly saw in a matter of a day or 2, the levels on the Raccoon River spiked from that previous graph. Literally in a matter of days, created this spike and that water was going through the plant. So we made a quick change on that. Unfortunately, we did pick up 2 levels of detectable levels of toxins in the finished water. We notified the DNR of that on August 3rd. And we learned more about the 4-tier communication protocols. Because we had detectable limits above 0.3 for 2 days, we had to do a public notice on that. And so the late hours of August 3rd, we did a press release informing the public that we did find toxins on that, and we notified our wholesale customers of that as well. Here's a graph of the toxins, the microcystin toxins that we are doing reports on. Historically, we do this about once a week. The testing, we do now have analytical equipment that we can test this, where before in years past, we would have to send that off to a lab, which would take 2 or 3 days to get back. Luckily, now we have our own equipment to be able to do that. However, it still takes about 12 hours to get the test results. We have to take the source waters, freeze and thaw them 3 times before running them through the equipment to lyse the cells and to get the toxins to release on there to be able to get a count of them. This graph just shows that, again, we've shown on previous graphs that we historically see toxin levels in the Des Moines River, but even last year we were starting to see toxin levels in Crystal Lake. So even our source water, our off river storage is getting outbreaks occurring in that. And so Crystal Lake, we had 196 days that were above the 0.3 parts per billion standard, finished water drinking standard. That brings it to our attention. And so we avoided use of Crystal Lake for several months because of this, these levels of toxins that we were seeing in that reservoir. The 4-tier communication plan. The first one is what we did in 2016, the early public messaging, because we had 2 consecutive finished samples above 0.3 parts per billion. The next step would be if we had 10 consecutive finished samples greater than 0.3, or 2 finished samples greater than 3 parts per billion within a 10-day period. And then it goes on to different levels. And so this early public messaging is very possible to occur again, even though we have the testing and the equipment to be able to do that, with tests taking 12 hours to complete, and the treatment process of fluid dry taking 24 hours from start to finish to go through. Even if we get a test result to show and we switch rivers or switch sources, we could still have that same water traveling for the treatment plant for another day, and we could get 2 days of positive tests in the finished water. So that's why it's really important that we are very aggressive with our testing. Right now we're doing a test every day, and if levels go up, we'll do a test every 8 hours. So we do not have source water instruments upstream like we have nitrate analyzing instruments upstream, where we can see this blue-green algae or these toxins coming downstream to us. So we're kind of blinded by that and have to be very aggressive in checking the source waters and making informed decisions and picking the best source water that we can to minimize the impact on our finished water. As we talked about before, treatment of cyanotoxins, much like nitrates, we try to find the river that has the least amount, and avoid the one with the largest offender. Cyanotoxins can be in 2 forms. They can be intracellular or extracellular. Think of intracellular as a particle. The toxins are within the cell. And we try to remove them as a solid particle, or through coagulation, flocculation, sedimentation. Even with that optimal particle removal conditions in 2016, it wasn't enough to remove them all. As a dissolved component or extracellular, think of it as the toxin is within the cell, the cell splits open, the toxins are released into the water. There we have to use powder activated carbon, chlorine, and other oxidants to try to remove them. It's much harder to do that. You always want to try to remove them as a particle if at all possible. We learned back in 2016, again, having to do a public notice and seeing that spike happen in literally a day or 2, that we have to be very vigilant in checking source waters when these blue-green algae is starting to form on the rivers to understand the impacts of that and make informed decisions. What future tools do we need for all of these water challenges? Well, certainly we could expand Saylorville with the groundwater under the influence of the wells. We do not have nearly the challenges that we see by just taking direct surface water, along with the UF and RO process of the treatment plants. It removes all the contaminants that we discussed, and the water quality leaving Saylorville is always more than meets the regulatory standards. So although it has its challenges and it's more expensive to operate, it certainly can tackle all of these future water quality challenges that we face. In the past, we've talked about additional off-water storage at McMullen, creating the chain of lakes, taking Crystal Lake, adding Purple Martin Lake, making a larger pool of water that we could pull water from. But obviously, seeing the last years, we know that we can still get algae blooms in there because we're pumping river water that has high nutrients into that reservoir that can create these blue-green algae outbreaks and toxins to form with that. So if we do continue with this project, we need to be very careful to monitor the water quality in the river that we pump into there and make a system that we can turn off and have enough storage in there where we're not pumping those high nutrients or high toxin levels into the chain of lakes that could create some bloom of the blue-green algae. The last option that we've been discussing the last few years is a new riverbank filtration for fluid water treatment plant or the North Well Field. This is a great concept that has a lot of benefits. Vern had discussed this in a previous board meeting, but the benefits of this North Well Field are very great, with removal of bacteria, viruses, algae, algal toxins, reduced turbidity, partial removal of TOCs, reduced nitrate concentrations, partial removal of some herbicides, pesticides, pharmaceuticals, and also in the winter months, having warmer water temperatures in the winter, which will likely result in less main breaks in the winter months of that. So this North Riverbank filtration project, although is a very expensive one, checks all the boxes on everything that we've discussed and all the challenges that we have. I truly believe that this project is the future for us in meeting all the future regulatory needs and continue to provide reliable water to our community. Here's a graph showing, or a drawing showing, where our Des Moines River intake is. We're currently doing studies to see about adding a well field and what kind of yield we can get. As Vernon mentioned previously, this Beaver Creek Valley has a deep aquifer there where we believe we could get very high yielding wells that could be pumped back to the Des Moines River intake, which that water could be brought back to Fleur Drive, having higher quality water with not all the conditions that we have discussed earlier in this presentation. So this is really a game changer for water quality, being able to get a high quality groundwater under the influence back here to Fleur Drive to augment the supply that we have in the gallery. With that, any questions?
Kyle, thank you for this presentation. It's exactly what I was looking for. Maybe a little even more in-depth, and I appreciate that. And I just think that it's important for all of us to be reminded how complicated it is and what a process it is to monitor and treat our water. And I appreciated the end part about looking forward to how we solve some of these problems in the future. I mean, that's going to come with significant cost and investment from our ratepayers, and it's important. Thank you. I mean, it was great. I have a feeling I'm going to have some questions, but I'll email them to you after I look through the slides again.
Very good.
Kyle, thank you. And I think Graham asked during the presentation if Michelle could send us all copies of your slides. And I agree with Graham. I think that people will have some questions after they have a chance to look at it more fully, and maybe we can schedule you at a committee meeting or something to go into those questions and get them to you. Because if people have questions, I mean, I would prefer to see everybody's questions and the answers to those things. So thank you for doing that.
Yes,
Ted,
Michelle has copies of the PDF, so I'm sure she can get those emailed out. I'd be happy to answer the questions. I know I went very quickly through it. It's been a long board meeting, but I wanted to try to give you a quick summary and overview of what we're seeing.
It was excellent, Kyle. And Ted, you know, one thing that occurred to me, a conversation that you and I had today or recently, I don't remember, about, you know, our ongoing communications efforts with the community. Yeah. I mean, this is what we're talking about here. There's so much detail here, and your thoughts about, you know, how to break this into smaller segments and share it with people will be very important.
We have to continue to tell our story, as we discussed, Graham, and I think Kyle told a big story there. There's a lot there. You know, great information. Quick synopsis from my perspective is we continue to have source water quality problems every day. We haven't had nitrate issues in the last few years, but we can't let our guard down. Kyle showed a slide where we had low nitrates for 4 or 5 years, and then they just came back with a vengeance. But you as board members, I think it's critically important that you understand that we are looking forward to how are we going to address these things. We cannot remove these toxins, but that doesn't mean we're just sitting back waiting to exceed. Kyle, engineering, others are looking at ways to improve our source water quality with the well field and other ideas so that we can meet our responsibility to continue to provide safe, clean water to the community. So.
Kyle, I wanted to thank you too. One of the things I was thinking, especially at the beginning of your slides when you were showing all of the historical graphics, was trying to place what the world looked like back in those different years as far as climate, weather, and policies and things along those, to see if I could understand better the different shifts and if there is any ability to predict them. But I think, you know, speaking of community outreach, one of the things, Ted, you also talked about was doing some outreach to other water treatment plants up and down the watershed. And I think having a collective, what's the word I'm looking for? Collective information from all those watersheds, that what they're looking at and what their graphs look like. Being able to tell that story and understanding what their future plans are and what our future plans as a consortium could look like. And I think there's a lot of powerful information. So thank you, Kyle, for sharing that. I do really appreciate it. You could tell I was trying to like move my cursor and get up there to see the numbers clear. So I really appreciate all that information, and Michelle for sharing those slides.
Well, and thank you, Michelle, because we could open it up and kind of add in the notes some of the things you were saying. I was typing as quickly as I could. This is one of those documents I think we'll all save and look back years from now. I mean, it gave a lot of historical perspective, so thank you.
Nice job, Kyle. Thank you very much. Next is my comments, and they're going to be incredibly short. Kyle just shared all this information about water quality, and we literally have been off the Raccoon River because of a little toxin blip for the last 4 or 5 days, just back onto the Raccoon today because of toxins. So this is real, and it's topical, and it's something we need to be aware of. And we did get our PFAS monitoring wells installed at the west end of the gallery. So we will start sampling those soon and start developing kind of a track record of what, if anything, we see in terms of PFAS in our source water.
Anything else, Ted?
Not for this board meeting, but we do have another board meeting. So
we do. So unless there's any questions about contract status spreadsheet and the lien certifications and reversals, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn the Board of Trustees meeting.
So moved.
I'm gonna stop this recording real quick. I'm gonna start another one so we can keep moving.
And I know we've been at this since